The deputies of this sheriff's office start every shift with the desire to safeguard lives, maintain the safety of our community. The use of deadly force is always a last resort and occurs in a complex set of circumstances, always tense and unstable situations. On Friday at 11:17 p.m., one of my deputies was forced to use deadly force. The circumstances of that incident are as follows. At 11:14, the deputy notified dispatch that he would be on foot patrol in the area of Charlton Street and Martin Luther King Boulevard in Indiantown. This is a routine and common practice for all deputies. 3 minutes later, at 11:17 p.m., the deputy advised via radio that shots were fired and he requested fire rescue. A second deputy who was close by on an unrelated traffic stop heard the shots and proceeded to the scene of the shooting, by which time a crowd had already gathered. That deputy observed the involved deputy administering first aid to the suspect victim, who we now have identified as Jerry Richardson. He also observed a large machete strapped to the body of Mr. Richardson. The second deputy heard the involved deputy ask, "Am I cut or hit?" Fire rescue did respond and transported Richardson to Martin Memorial Hospital South, where he was pronounced deceased. The involved deputy, who will be identified Wednesday morning, sustained scratches to his throat, his back, as well as abrasions to his hands. He is on administrative leave per our policy. At my request, the State Attorney's Office responded that night and is conducting a separate investigation. Also at my request, the FBI responded to the scene that night and is monitoring our investigation. I will be speaking to Mr. Richardson's family and members of the community tonight in Indiantown to answer as many questions as I can. All the facts of this case are not yet known. The involved deputy will answer many questions once he gives an official statement. Although all the circumstances are not known, there are some clear facts. Mr. Richardson was armed with a large and dangerous machete. Within the past 3 months, Mr. Richardson attacked a Martin County Sheriff's Sergeant without provocation, in the same location under somewhat similar circumstances. The ensuing struggle sent one of my deputies to the hospital. Mr. Richardson was armed with a knife at that time and was Baker-acted following that incident. The autopsy on Mr. Richardson is being conducted as I speak. And with that, I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can.
Just to clarify, you said the deputy involved also had injuries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the question is, did the deputy involved have injuries? The answer is yes. He had some fairly substantial scratches to his throat, and moving down would have been just below his vest, as if he had been grabbed. And then he had some scratch marks on his back, and he had some minor abrasions on one of his knuckles, one of his hands.
How do you believe he sustained those injuries?
Will wants to know how I think he sustained those injuries. Based on the circumstances that we have, it appears, until we hear from the deputy, we will not know for sure, that Mr. Richardson scratched the deputy in some type of physical altercation.
Sheriff, you said you had an encounter with Mr. Richardson before. What was different this time that made it escalate?
The question was, one of my deputies had an encounter with Mr. Richardson earlier. It was within the last couple of months. It was right in that same area. At that time, it was a sergeant who was sitting in his patrol vehicle. Mr. Richardson came up to the car, began in trying to engage the sergeant in conversation. You have a full report of that incident, but going from memory, the sergeant tried to get out of the car. Mr. Richardson jammed him into the car, pushed back on the car door, used his bicycle as leverage. The sergeant was able to get out. Mr. Richardson had a knife, which he, rather than attack the deputy with the knife, dropped or put back in his pocket. It's right there on the report. Then he had a pen, was pushing it towards the the sergeant's face and then pushed the sergeant hard enough that the sergeant went back into the patrol car and dented our car. And then the struggle was on. 2 other deputies got there. One of them was injured, had to go to the hospital. And the sergeant only had superficial bruising, nothing serious.
Sheriff, the deputy that was involved in this recent incident, was he aware that another deputy had an encounter with this person?
Yeah, the question is, was the deputy involved just now or Friday night? Was he aware of that previous incident? I don't know the answer to that. That deputy has not given us a statement yet. He is not assigned to Indiantown. He is a court services deputy, has 10 to 12 years. We're going to open his file up to you here after this. I don't know. He may have known him. He may not have known him.
Sure, can you say
Let me go ahead. I'm going to finish this follow-up and then I'll move over.
Now I forgot, but give me a second. So you said he's a court services deputy, so we don't know if he knew about this encounter with the sergeant prior to this incident?
Yeah, your question is he's a court service deputy and he didn't know, may not have known this individual, and that's right.
Okay.
Do you have
I'll go ahead and I'll get back to you,
Can
Will.
say, since there was a previous incident, in that incident or in this one, was Mr. Richardson ever tased as opposed to using, stronger force?
Right, the question is, on the other incident or any other incident I'm aware of, was Mr. Richardson tased? He was not tased in that incident. When to deploy a taser and when to use deadly force some of it's a matter of policy, some of it's a matter of instinct. They're all dictated by the circumstances. In the first one, where he pushed the deputy hard enough to create a dent, the brawl was on. The time to deploy a taser was too late. We don't train for or expect our deputies to use a taser in deadly force situations. So if the circumstances are described by the deputy as Mr. Richardson having come after him or attacked with that machete, the use of a taser would have been completely inappropriate.
Do we have any better slight understanding of what may have occurred here? The reason why I ask is because the initial news release just said, the deputy called out the shots, the deputy said he was on foot patrol, then shots fired, and we found a machete on the body. I mean, any better understanding of what could have happened?
I'm going to try to summarize Will's question. It was pretty complex, but do we have any better sense of what happened leading up to the shots fired? And the answer is we do not have any more sense now than we did that evening, because we don't have the involved deputies' statements yet. So there is a gap in our understanding of what occurred.
Was there anybody, when the shots were fired, was there another deputy there other than the deputy that did the shooting?
When the shots were fired, was there another deputy present other than the one down the block who heard the shots? The answer is no. That deputy was by himself, just checked out on the radio, on foot patrol, which is a common practice. You hear it all night long. You know our code for it, 10108. You hear it if you listen to our radio. It just means I'm going to be away from my car on foot checking the area.
And this deputy was a bailiff, I guess?
And the question is the deputy a bailiff. He's a court service deputy. He spent years on the road, and he spent years out in Indiantown, so he knows the area. He knows how to be a patrol deputy, but his current assignment was in the court.
Sheriff, why do you not have a official statement from the deputy if this happened Friday?
Yeah.
You would think, sometimes in a situation like that, it's hard to remember what happened, so would you not want to talk to them right away?
Great question. It's a two-part question. Why don't we have the statement yet? This occurred Friday, and wouldn't we have wanted to get his statement while it was fresh? Actually, the reverse is true. A fresh statement is oftentimes not accurate because of the profound physiological reactions that occur. Without trying to give you a course on use of force, having been, I'm somewhere in my 45th year in this industry, I know from my own personal experience that oftentimes in the immediacy of a violent encounter, it is very difficult to remember exactly what happened. There's so much adrenaline, there's so much goes on in the body physiologically that is very common for a deputy, even when he's recorded and looks back and says, well, I didn't remember that. So, and the second part of that answer is the deputy, just like everybody else, is entitled to due process. And so the deputy's entitled, if he wants to, he can make an initial statement. But in our industry today, as much liability as my deputies carry, it's very uncommon across all law enforcement spectrums for a law enforcement professional to use deadly force and to give an immediate statement. They will invariably consult with an attorney, collect their thoughts, and then come and give a formal statement, which is tentatively scheduled for later this week, and it will take place at the state attorney's
Has
office.
he not wanted to make a statement prior to that date that you said?
I'm sorry, what was
Has
your?
the deputy not wanted to make a statement prior to the date you said he's going to?
Yeah, the question was, had the deputy not wanted to make a statement? I'm not sure I could characterize him as not wanting to make a statement, as opposed to, as we always do, we call their attorney, and he has a union representative, a PBA attorney, and so the attorney's advice that night was for him to wait, to collect his thoughts, and then to make a formal statement.
Is there any video surveillance of this shooting?
Question is there any video? We don't have any. We are actually putting a signboard out there as I speak, or sometime today. We're going to ask the community if there's any witnesses, if anybody has information, if there's any video, please give it. But we don't have any, and we don't know of any.
Sheriff, I know you said on Friday multiple shots fired. Do we know how many?
Yeah, the question was Friday. I said multiple shots. Today, I can say there were 6 shots fired, 5 of which hit the Mr. Richardson.
And how close was the patrol car that this deputy was in to where the scene was, or where the shooting happened?
How close, your question is how close was the deputy's patrol car to where the shots were fired? It was just right there, right outside the car, within feet.
Sheriff, you may have said this, but what was the reason why the deputy said he wanted to go on foot patrol in a certain area? Was that part of his assigned duty?
Yeah, the question was, why did the deputy decide to go out on foot patrol? And was that part of his assigned duty? The answer is yes. And the decision to get on the radio and advise that he'd be out on foot is his. And we do it all the time. I mean, that is common practice. You can only see so much from a police car, from a sheriff's deputy car. And so it's very common for my deputies to get out at night and just take a walk.
Sheriff, what was going on out there that night? Was there a party? Was there an event? Was there, do you know? I mean, was there a crowd of people, a lot of people out there?
Greg's question was there a party or was there an event? What was going on that night? It was, it's just a little to the, if I got my directions right, a little to the west, Farms Road direction from Jake's, which is a place that people in that community will come and play cards, they'll gamble, they play dominoes, they drink. And this parking lot is just to the west of Jake's. So there was nothing going on that was unusual for a Friday night. There was nothing unusual about my deputy getting out of his car to check the area. There was nothing unusual about the traffic stop that was taking place. Everything was a normal and routine night for Indiantown.
Do deputies that work in the court typically go out in the field as well, or is this like an extra duty because of the holiday?
The question is, do the deputies in the court usually go out on patrol? The answer is when we have shortages, which we did that night, somebody either called in sick or was on vacation, what we do is we have a software program here, and we have an off-duty and overtime coordinator, and they will post it available to the whole agency. It's first come, first served. They are limited to so many hours a pay period, so this deputy would have seen that availability for an 8-hour shift and picked it up.
And then also this man, it might be in the paperwork, but after he was Baker acted, was he charged in the first incident?
Yeah, the question was, Mr. Richardson was Baker acted in the first incident where he shoved the sergeant. Was he arrested? The answer is no, he was Baker acted. So the sergeant believed at the time that it was more of a mental issue. We're not doctors, we're not psychiatrists, but he chose the more compassionate course, give him the benefit of the doubt, didn't think it was the act of a rational person, and didn't give him a felony arrest, but rather I took him to a psychiatric facility for treatment.
Do you know if there's any other witnesses on the scene? I mean, I asked earlier about any other
Sure.
deputies there, but what about other people since you mentioned?
Yeah, Will's question is there other witnesses on the scene? We do have 2 or 3 witnesses that saw some of the event leading up to the shooting. Nobody has come forward yet and say that they saw the shooting take place.
Was the machete the only weapon on Mr. Richardson?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Was the machete the only weapon you believe that was?
Yeah, the question was it the only weapon on Mr. Richardson? Was it a machete? The answer is yes, it was only a machete.
And do you have reason to believe that the deputy involved was also hurt by that machete, or do you not know?
The question was, do I have reason to believe the deputy was hurt by the machete? I don't think he was hurt. His scratches and abrasions were more consistent with fingernail hands. There were no lacerations.
The man who was shot 5 times, do we know where he was shot?
The question is, the man that was shot 5 times, we know where. Yes, all in his upper torso, all to the front.
Sheriff, the deputies that usually work out at that location that are regulars, do they know Mr. Richardson as the guy who's in the neighborhood that's kind of not all there?
The question is, do the deputies out there know Mr. Richardson as a guy who's not all out there, your words and your gestures, not mine? Yeah, the answer is yes, they do know him, and they do know that Mr. Richardson can be prone to erratic behavior.
But the deputy who was working and pulled the trigger obviously did not know Mr. Richardson, I'm guessing.
The question is, did the deputy pull the trigger know Mr. Richardson? That's yet to be determined. I just don't know.
And Sheriff, where was the machete when you guys got there? Was it in his hand? Was it still on his shoulder?
The question.
You were told he carried a machete all the time.
What was this? Let me answer the first question, Greg, and then answer the second one. Your first question was, where was the machete? We actually have a photograph, an initial photograph shows the machete laying across his body. So he's on the ground, on his back, the machete's on his chest, with the handle down towards, would have been his right hand.
And do you guys know whether he always carry a machete with him?
Greg's question, do we know if he always carries a machete? I don't know the answer, Greg. I know it's still very early in the investigation. We're talking to all of our Indiantown people, and we'll determine if anybody's ever seen him with the machete before. But the fact that he was carrying a machete that night over his shoulder does not seem to be in dispute, even from the people that we've talked to so far.
Is it legal to walk around with a machete on, like?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is it legal to walk around with a machete unsheathed? The answer is yeah, actually it is. It's not a concealed weapon. Not that I'm advocating that people walk around with machetes slung over their shoulders, just for the record.
Sheriff, where are you going to be talking to the family and residents of Indiantown today, and what time does that happen?
The question, where and when will I be talking to the family? It's at 7 p.m. At some church on Martin Luther King Boulevard. We're waiting for a call back for the exact address.
Okay.
7 p.m. Martin Luther King Boulevard at a yet-to-be-announced church.
Sheriff, can you say if the deputy has ever been involved in a uniquely use of force incident during his career with the sheriff's office?
The question is, has the deputy been involved in the use of force in his, I think he's been here maybe 10 years. We'll know more. I don't know the answer to that. I would suspect after 10 years he probably does have a use of force or 2 in there. But we'll see. And we're going to open his file up to you all today, so there won't be any question. We'll redact his name until Wednesday, but you can look at his file and see for yourselves what his past is.
Is there a reason why his name is redacted until tomorrow?
Question is there a reason why his name is redacted? Yes, there is a reason, and that is so that the deputy can prepare his family for the public scrutiny. He had to prepare his children for questions they might get at school, to make any precautions he might want to make around his house as far as his own security. You know, we live in a funny day. There was a time many decades ago where we didn't think like that. We released the deputies or the officers' names immediately. Those days are long gone. And because of the internet and because of the ease in which people can find out where we live and our patterns of our lives, we think we owe it to our people to let them take every reasonable precaution that they think they have to prepare themselves and their family for what's coming when his name is released.
Is that a new policy with the sheriff's office, or has it been customary to do that in recent events?
The question is it a new policy? Well, thankfully we haven't shot that many people since I've been here. The last shooting we had, we did hold the name for a few days. I think you saw it not too long ago in St. Lucie County where they held a Fort Pierce officer's name for maybe weeks. You know, we think a few days is reasonable. And the fact, and I just want to clarify something, the fact that we're releasing his file immediately will give you an insight into what kind of a deputy he was. And although I think his name is important because it's public record, it's not as critical as what kind of deputy was he, which we're clearly releasing today. There's no secrets, there's nothing hidden, there's nothing that we will shield from public scrutiny in this case.
Did the patrol car that was there have a dash camera?
Did the patrol car that was there have a dash camera? No.
No.
And nor did the deputy have a body camera.
And I know you mentioned over the weekend to the FBI, you called in the FBI to assist. Can you talk about the FBI's role in this investigation?
Right, the question is, I called the FBI, which is correct, and what's their role? Their role is to monitor. The FBI, the federal government, watches for civil rights violations. So if there was a civil rights violation, improper use of force, a deprivation of civil rights, then the FBI would step in. The fact that I asked them there gives them a leg up. So they're there, they can actually see the scene, they can talk to people, they're there from the very beginning. The state attorney's office is doing it differently. Now the state attorney's office is there. They're doing a full-scale, separate investigation. They're not paralleling with my people. They're not looking over my people's shoulders. They are doing their own investigation. They have certified law enforcement personnel. They have detectives assigned, and they're working independent of us. We don't. But that being said, we won't interview or anyone or look at evidence without their being present.
It's going to be Wednesday for sure when you release the deputy, Sam?
The question is Wednesday for sure. Tentatively for sure.
Okay.
I don't want to eliminate any possibility that something might occur. We've already sent word to the deputy, or are going to send word, that Wednesday. I talked to him. I talked to him personally the day after, and I did tell him unequivocally, you're a public servant, and your name will be released, as would my name or anybody else's name under similar circumstances.
And Sheriff, last question from me. When's the last time you guys had a deadly deputy-involved shooting?
The question is, when was the last time we had a deadly shooting? And I would say it was June of 1993. Oh, 2013. I'm sorry, 93, 2013.
Is that the Scooters bar?
That was Scooters, right? I was trying to take my election and move forward, but that was actually my hire date and move forward.
What month was that?
Sometime in June.
I believe it was June.
My detective captain said it was June 2000. I've been here 6 months as sheriff.
And Sheriff, again, I think you may have answered this question a long time ago at another news conference, but your deputies, are they trained how to deal with people with mental issues?
Great question. Angela's question is, are our deputies trained to deal with people with mental issues? Actually, we are going, the entire agency is going through CIP, which is critical incident management training, dealing with people with mental illness. So yes, we are being trained. You all have heard me talk about it. I've been talking about it for a couple of years now, the need for better services in the community. I am not diagnosing Mr. Richardson. I am not saying Mr. Richardson had mental illness. I am not saying that. But he was Baker acted, and his actions were extremely questionable. But that being said, you know, we do have a program that we've received funding for to start sending co-responders out with my deputies. We are trying to get ahead of what we see as a growing problem with mental illness, Baker Acts, attempted suicides. It's a perplexing and common, constant problem.
And is this the only incident that your deputies have had with him, reported in the last month? Have you run into him other days out there and just never did anything because?
Yeah, the question is this the incident I mentioned where he shoves my sergeant, was that the only incident? No, we're actually aware of another one where one of the regular deputies out there, or routinely assigned deputies, said that Mr. Richardson was acting erratic and kind of walking around him, and so the deputy just moved away, and that was it on that one. And if there's anything else, we'll find out. Thank you all so much. Have a good afternoon.